Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon for this important and exciting conversation that we're going to be having today. I want to first thank all of our affiliated bar associations for joining us, the WLAM, the Oakland County Bar Association, the Macomb County Bar Association, and the Ingham County Bar Association for joining us today and coming together to talk about this important topic of managing life's trials. Our speaker today and presenter is Tom Grden of the State Bar of Michigan. I want to give just a brief introduction of Tom and all the important things he does for us at the State Bar. So Tom is an employee of the State Bar of Michigan, and he is a clinical case manager for the Lawyers and Judges Assistance Program, which he's done for the past 6 years. He's a licensed professional counselor and has experience working with impaired professionals, those with substance use disorders, mental health diagnoses, and he facilitates a weekly support group for licensed attorneys in Michigan, which I highly recommend that you look into. It's a great program. He is also an advisory committee member for the ABA's Commission on Lawyers Assistance Programs. He presents regularly on topics pertaining to law student and lawyer well-being and is also an ICO contributor. His written work has been published on multiple occasions in the Michigan Bar Journal's Practicing Wellness column. He holds a master's degree in counseling with a focus on addictions, which he earned in 2017 from the University of Detroit Mercy. Tom and I know each other from my time on the Lawyers and Judges Assistance Committee of the State Bar of Michigan, which I highly recommend if you're a licensed attorney to look into joining. And I'm so happy to welcome you, Tom, today, and I will turn over the proverbial mic to you.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction, Mary, and a hat tip to you as well for the work that you did on the committee. Since you were the only committee member here, Mary was essentially an entire subgroup or an entire working group by herself. So she did a ton of great work for Michigan lawyers as far as wellness. So I'm going to take a second here and share a PowerPoint. We can freely distribute this if anybody does want it at the end. That's fine. There's nothing proprietary about it. Feel free to ask questions. If we were live, I would say feel free to interrupt, but I feel like we lose a little bit virtual, but I'll be happy to answer any at the end. We're going to cover a lot of topics pretty quickly. You can think of this as a kind of a survey course to lawyer well-being. So with that out of the way, let's see. Can anyone see that? All right, I'm seeing some nods.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about stress, anxiety, depression, what to do about it. First thing I want to lay down here, when we use this term wellness, right, it's more than just the absence of illness. When we talk about wellness, we're talking about something that constantly requires you to be pursuing it, right? Wellness is not a state of being or a state of mind. It's a goal that needs to be constantly and deliberately pursued. And it's to do that, we encourage folks, you take an approach that you're trying to protect your own mental health before it gets to a point where you need to seek outside help or something goes very wrong. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But essentially, the same as any professional athlete, your availability matters as well. So taking that prevention approach when it comes to injury, and in this case, mental injury, is far better than trying to cobble yourself together after some kind of crisis. So first, we'll get into a couple statistics here. As of 2024, the American Medical Association has now reclassified the practice of law as a safety-sensitive profession. Previously, it was considered decision-critical, which on their rankings is slightly below. But safety-sensitive professions include airline pilots, police officers, therapists, and now lawyers as well. And so the easy way to remember this is, what are the professions that are not allowed to have a bad day? If you would feel comfortable with your pilot having a bad day, you're braver than I am. I probably would not want to get on that plane. But the same thing now goes for attorneys. You're being held to this extremely, incredibly high standard. And it essentially means you don't get the benefit of a bad day either, right? So why wellness is so important is we're trying to make sure that you stay healthy, that you don't have a bad day, because the repercussions can be very great for your clients. I've got a statistic down there, 70% or so of disciplinary proceedings have been shown to involve a substance abuse or mental health disorder. Anecdotally, I would ballpark that number more at 95%. It's my view that folks don't go through the rigors of law school, you know, take the bar exam, get licensed with the intention of acting unethically, right? Usually the unethical behavior that leads to discipline is something that is out of a person's control, or obviously something that they did and need to take accountability for, but not something that they went into it thinking, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. You know, no one gets behind the wheel of their car thinking, yeah, I'm going to drive drunk and get caught and get arrested. You know, no one ignores client communication because they want to, right? Sometimes there's underlying things like depression or substance use going on. So the goal is to kind of address that. First, find out what's going on, address it, and that way you don't get to that point where you're in this number that's, you know, being disciplined for unethical behavior.
Tom, sorry to interrupt, but we are
Sure.
on the first slide.
Oh no, I'm
I'm
so
like,
sorry.
it sounds like you're talking about other slides, and we are on the first slide.
Oh,
I didn't want to say anything in case I was wrong about that, but I'm glad you did, Nicole. There we go. Now we can
okay, I
see it.
apologize there.
So this is the absence of illness slide. Okay, safety
Okay, we talked about safety
professions.
sensitive professions. I'll give everyone just a moment. I apologize. Thank you. Boy, that would have been bad
That's
to go through
okay.
the whole thing on the cover slide. Okay. And this is about where we would pick up anyway here. So in 2016, we had the study that really changed the field of lawyer well-being. This was conducted by Hazelton, Betty Ford, and the ABA. Though if you look it up, only Betty Ford and Hazelton are accredited. 13,000 attorneys as a sample size was pretty much unprecedented. I'm also excited to say that we're in the early process of updating this study, and it should be complete by 2026. So for those in the room, you may get some communication from the ABA, you know, essentially asking you to participate in the update of the study. I would encourage you to do so. There are a ton of safeguards in place to protect your anonymity, but it's important that we get a real good look. Michigan did not participate last time around, so these numbers aren't fully applicable to the folks in here. This time we are absolutely participating in the study. And as a matter of fact, the State Bar of Michigan's communication department is crafting the advertisement for the entire country. So every state bar that wants to participate is getting essentially a communications package from the State Bar of Michigan's communications team. So we're very proud to be doing that as well. I think I've stalled enough at this point that people can look over the statistics. And so I can now tell you that the exact numbers are not terribly important. What is important is the context behind them. So for every single percentage I've got on the screen right now, lawyers are the highest of all white collar professions. So higher than doctors, surgeons, engineers. Lawyers come in the highest on every single one of these scores: depression, anxiety, stress. Particularly telling is the career prevalence of anxiety and depression, 61%. At this point, shouldn't even be surprising to folks that 61% of lawyers experience anxiety at some point in their career. Nearly half are experiencing what would qualify as clinical depression. And then, you know, a pretty surprising finding of this study was that the attorneys under 30 or practicing less than 10 years are the most at risk for these. Up until the study, it was kind of common knowledge or commonly held without ever being proven that the longer you were in the profession, the more at risk you were. And the thinking went that you were worn down by the stressors over time. When in actuality, what we're seeing is that over time, you're building resilience. And the other piece of it is, of course, the culture, right? You've got plenty of legal stakeholders who are thinking back to their time as first-year associates and going, well, that was hell for me, so it should be hell for them as well. I I think we are moving in the right direction there, but there's a lot of that old style of thinking here. And essentially what it creates is a system where older attorneys are consuming their young. Last little bit of data here. An updated study, not sure the author, I think it's cited at the end as well, off the top of my head, but this one was kind enough to split the sample size by gender as well and ask a few more specific questions. So a couple I'll highlight here. Contemplated, I'm doing it again. I didn't
Yeah,
switch
sorry,
over.
Tom. I was
I'm
just about
so
to say that.
sorry.
Don't worry.
Couple I'll highlight here. The first is the statistic of contemplating leading the profession. There's a lot of discussion within the ABA wellness circles right now on whether this is a function of the profession pressuring women more often, and so they're contemplating leaving the profession, or if it's a function of men feeling outside pressure, you know, irregardless of the profession, and can't find it within themselves to leave, even if it's entirely unhealthy, and leaving the profession of law would be much healthier for them. I suspect it's a little bit of both. I did want to define risky drinking and hazardous drinking, the very bottom two statistics there. Risky drinking is any behavior that can cause or potentially cause harm to yourself. So this is more of like a long-term view. Usually the very acute example that everyone goes to is getting behind the wheel of your car while you're drunk. That is risky drinking behavior. But it also qualifies as hazardous drinking behavior because hazardous drinking is defined as something that also puts other people at risk. So not only drunk driving, but anything else you might be engaged in while drinking that potentially could cause harm to other people. Quick primer on, excuse me. There we go. Quick primer on a few other definitions that are starting to come up pretty often in the discussion about lawyer well-being. Vicarious trauma, secondhand exposure to traumatic events. This is something that's unavoidable for most attorneys, right? The metaphor I like to give folks is imagine that when you graduated law school, you got sworn in, that you were this very sturdy block of marble. And every time you have a client interaction, it's like they take a piece of sandpaper and they just do one swipe across your block of marble. And you're not going to notice that over the course of a day or even a week. But after years and years, it starts to wear you down. And I say it's unavoidable because as the nature of the profession goes, most people are not hiring a lawyer because everything is going well in their life, right? Very similar to why people see a therapist. You go to a therapist or a lawyer because something has gone terribly wrong and you need help. And it takes its toll on the caregivers that this is the person that you're seeing every single day of your career. The only difference between law and therapy practice is that I was taught that A, this is going to happen to you, and B, this is what you can do about it. It's my understanding that you don't get very much education about this in law school, so it's something that's important for us to address now. Compassion fatigue is very often a symptom of vicarious trauma. This is where you start to feel your passion eroding, right? I know a lot of you got into this profession because you wanted to make a positive difference on the world. You wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. And sometimes, after years of doing that, you start to feel that motivation wane a bit. And that is not any kind of personality shortcoming on your part. That is simply being worn down over time. And then finally, we get to burnout, which is kind of the end stage of this process, vicarious trauma into compassion fatigue and then burnout. The one thing I'll say is there's not necessarily any specific cure for it. It's more of like a long road back. And it also can include doubts about your competency, doubts about your fit in whether it's your company or whether it's in the legal practice as a whole. It's almost like imposter syndrome is sneaking up on you, even though you've been in your position and worked confidently for years. Also a symptom of burnout. And then I'll share kind of a personal anecdote, and I've very recently heard it from an independent source as well. But if you've ever been driving into work and you had a fantasy about a minor fender bender, you know, nothing that's going to leave anybody injured, but just enough that, you know, your whole day is done, right? That is burnout. If you're thinking about, wouldn't it be great if I just kind of slid slowly into a ditch on a snowy day and I couldn't go to work that day? That is classic burnout. Let's see. All right, this chart is a study conducted between the Wisconsin Lawyer Assistance Program and the Wisconsin Public Defender Office way back in 2011. Why I love to include this here is that we can have some data of the general population of the time as well. Now, obviously, that general population data is going to look very different in 2025 post-pandemic. But at the time, we can see that, you know, levels of depression for lawyers almost 4 times as high. Highest levels of acute PTSD symptoms. You see it in comparison to their support staff as well. So it really goes to drive home this point that, you know, the client-facing people, you know, the interpersonal interactions are what are taking their toll. We see the functional impairment darn near triple the support staff who are also interacting with clients. The vicarious trauma almost triple, burnout almost triple. And this is all just in relation to the Wisconsin PD support staff as well. So what's the answer, right? I hate it when I have to do a CEU for my licensure and they spend an hour talking about what the problem is and how terrible it is, and then they devote 0 time to what we can do about it. So the first thing that I really stress is building resilience, right? This is how you come back from burnout. This is how you can inoculate yourself to compassion fatigue. It's almost like someone's got their finger on your scales of justice here with the vicarious trauma. And the way that we balance that back out is making an intentional effort to build our own resilience. And that involves deliberate action that is meaningful to you. And it's almost like you're coping ahead of time. So when that inevitable vicarious trauma comes up or a crisis comes up, we've almost got this mental health airbag that's cushioning the blow there. I would also compare it to, say, enamel strengthening toothpaste. You know, what does the dentist always tell you? Once it's gone, it's gone. But in the meantime, we can strengthen it, right? We can strengthen what we do have. And we're going to talk just a minute about how to build resilience here. Easiest way to remember it, awareness, balance, and connection. Personally, I think awareness is more than half the battle. So many folks are not aware that something is going terribly wrong in their life until it reaches a point where it's visible to other people. And unfortunately, once we've reached that point where, you know, there's a behavior that's visible and outward, that usually leads to some kind of ethical violation as well. So the hope is that we're building resilience, we're being aware of our own emotions and the toll that the profession takes, and then we're taking steps to mitigate that. So how to build awareness here? First thing, look for the psychological red flags. Could take the form of increased relationship conflicts. Very common one is numbness. Increased irritability, we see that very often actually with folks who could be suffering from clinical depression. And many of us have this conception that depression is, you know, either feeling blue or sad or else feeling numb, right? And both of those are correct, but for a lot of folks, it takes this form of numbness. It's like your emotions are muted. You can't feel things to the same intensity that you would normally feel them, which really takes its toll on you, especially during happy occasions when you're not reaching those former peaks of happiness, right? And so I bring up irritability as part of that because folks who are experiencing numbness as part of depression, the easiest emotion for our bodies to feel is anger. So if you feel that increased irritability, if you have a quicker trigger, it could be a sign that you're feeling numbness and, you know, your body just wants to feel something, right? And that's where the irritability comes out as well. Inability to focus is also a big and important one. as humans, we use almost every part of our brain in order to maintain and hold our focus on something. So when our focus begins to slip, if we're not able to hold our focus in the same way that we used to at different points in our life, it can sometimes be the canary in the coal mine that something is going wrong. It's not going to narrow it down much for you, but it is absolutely a sign that something's going on, needs further exploration, perhaps even outside help to figure out what is going on. But it's especially important as well for lawyers who are used to being the sharpest person in the room, the most focused person in the room. And when that focus starts to slip a bit, that is when you start to see outward behaviors, unethical practice, not on purpose, obviously, but it seeps into the work and it becomes a competency issue as well. And then finally, I'll just, real quick talk about the feeling anxious but not knowing why. And this is where we can differentiate between feeling anxious and actual clinical anxiety. We all feel anxious. Human beings evolved to be the top of the food chain on Earth because our caveman ancestors felt anxiety. There's a line in the Christian religion, who can add a day to their life by worrying? Well, the answer to that was cavemen, thousands and thousands of years ago. If they heeded what their worries were, they survived. But unfortunately, now that we have risen to the top of the food chain and we don't have the same stressors as they did, our bodies haven't turned that off. So there is good anxiety. I know there's a couple philosophers that talk about it as well for the philosophy majors in here. But there is that good level of anxiety that can motivate us. When it starts to cross into a clinical problem is when A, you're not able to identify the source of the anxiety you're feeling, or B, the intensity of the anxiety is so sharp that it's beginning to interfere with your functioning. And this is just a kind of a physical or a visual representation of that. What you're aiming for is the green plateau here of just enough anxiety that you feel challenged, that you feel motivated, that you're able to work at an optimal level for you. If you didn't feel any anxiety at all, I can't imagine anyone would be in this room today, because you wouldn't have felt any pressure to study for the bar exam or to, study for an important test or prepare for an important case, right? We need a little bit of that anxiety to motivate us, but obviously when we cross into too complex of a task, too intense of anxiety, or unexplained anxiety that messes with our functionality, then it becomes problematic. Next thing we'll get into for that awareness piece and figuring out what is wrong, physiological red flags. A lot of these are not going to be indicative of any one mental health problem, but very often they're going to be correlated to something going on. And the metaphor I like to share with people for this is that it's kind of common nowadays for the real pedantic folks to say, oh, going outside without a coat on doesn't make you sick. The cold weather doesn't make you sick. Germs make you sick. Fine, we'll acknowledge that. But what's not being said there is that when our body is using up energy, keeping ourselves warm, it's energy we don't have to then fight off other germs. So anything you picked up in your house and you walk out without a coat on, all of a sudden your body has just a little less resources to deal with that. And it's the same way for a lot of these physiological red flags. If we're already dealing with something mental health related beneath the surface, our body now has less energy and resources to deal with other physical maladies. So it's always good to just think about what, I'm sick again. I'm sick for the third time in 2 months. What's really going on here? Is it just coincidence, or is my body not fighting this off like it used to for some other reason? And then the functional red flags here. This is the point that we all want to avoid. This is the point where it's become observable behavior. A lot of my job is monitoring folks who have run into the Attorney Grievance Commission because something has gone terribly wrong. And no one ever wants to end up in that position, right? You work too hard to get to this point to have your license at risk. But unfortunately, it does happen. If it didn't happen, I probably wouldn't have a job at all. And so, anyone who is a legal stakeholder in this room who has ever supervised other folks, I'm sure you can identify with a lot of these red flags here. The increased absenteeism, the lower productivity, which is very often a product of an inability to focus or an inability to motivate. The missed deadlines, very common again, and we're actually starting to see an uptick in that. I would say in the past year or so, folks getting grieved for missed deadlines or lack of client communication, lack of client response. Those are all depressive symptoms. I mean, when I hear about that, I'm thinking, okay, this is a small task. Why was this lawyer avoiding this task? Usually it's some kind of underlying depression there. And then we see too, very often folks look to self-medicate with some kind of substance as well. And then if it's not managed very well, then it leads to a substance use disorder. So with all that awareness in mind, I want to say that, again, the awareness piece of building your resilience is, I would say, 2/3 of the battle. Just having the wherewithal to look inside yourself, do an honest assessment, figure out what is really going on. A lot of times it can help to ask someone, that you trust, that isn't going to abuse the information. Be honest with them and ask them, are you seeing anything from me? Are you seeing increased irritability? Are you seeing my lack of focus at all? And a lot of times folks, it can be helpful to get that extra opinion to really tip you off on what's going on. They see you differently than you see you. But if you do have that awareness piece down, then the next piece is trying to achieve some kind of balance. And I want to be careful because I loathe the term work-life balance. I think it is everywhere in popular culture nowadays, and its heart is in the right place. And I love to see that as a society, we're moving in the right direction. But if we're being honest with ourselves, there's no work-life balance. We are never going to be able to devote an equal amount of time to the life portion that we are to the work portion. It's just not the way we're set up to be able to survive and make a living. So the way we balance that scale is by finding areas that we might be lacking in. And what I have on the screen right now are 6 domains. They were derived by the ABA, and they're still available on the ABA website. And it's a look to, using our newfound awareness, looking at which domains might I be a little underdeveloped in, which domains am I a little overdeveloped in, and what can I deliberately and authentically engage in to try and bring up those lagging domains. A lot of folks would immediately jump to this idea that, oh, I'm overdeveloped on my occupational, right? And that is usually fair, but I want to stress too that occupational is not simply the amount of work that you're completing. It's also, are you finding your work meaningful? And one other one I want to make sure I clarify too is that spiritual one, because it turns a lot of people off. But when we talk about spirituality, at least in the domain of well-being, what we mean is just finding something that you can belong to that is greater than yourself. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be a social endeavor, but it's feeling a sense of belonging to something outside of yourself. For some folks, that takes the form of activism. For some folks, it can just be as simple as joining a club or a group of hobbyists, anything to foster a connection, which happens to be the third part of building resilience here is connection, right? And just a quick overview. Obviously, everyone in here is a grown adult. They can read. I don't need to read this word for word. But when we're talking about building connection, you're trying to engage your passions. And this is a big, big part of building resilience as well, is finding something that is meaningful to you and engaging in it authentically. And this could be as simple as sitting down on the couch and watching Netflix with a significant other for an evening. But the big caveat is turning your phone off, silencing your email so you're not getting notifications, allowing yourself to be fully present in whatever it is that you're trying to do. That is the most important thing. If you're having a conversation with someone, if you're out socializing because you're trying to increase that social aspect of that domain, and you're already thinking about work the next day, or, on a more simple scale, if you're already thinking about the next thing you're going to say, you're not fully engaged at that point. So making a deliberate effort to remain engaged with what it is you're doing and fully present in it as well is an important part of connection. So far we've talked about kind of big picture interventions, and they're going to look different for every single person in this room. It's about finding the path that's correct for you. As we kind of bring it to a close here, I want to end with some very concrete coping skills that you can use in the moment. They are useful for almost everyone. If you have heart issues, talk to your doctor first before engaging in a couple of these, and you will see why. So the first one I'll talk about, temperature. What we're doing is we're putting something cold around either our forehead, the soft tissue around our cheeks, neck, chin, and back of our head. What we're doing is we're trying to trick our bodies into thinking that we just dove underwater. We as mammals have this dive reflex. And when we trigger that reflex, our bodies automatically divert blood from our extremities to our heart and our brain. So this is really helpful for times when that anxiety gets really high and it feels unmanageable, and our heart is just racing and we're not functioning well. Doing this can help bring your heart rate back down a little bit, and it can help bring that anxiety down to a place where it's manageable. It's not going to bring you fully back down to baseline. It's not a cure for your near panic attack or crisis. But the point is just get yourself from a place where you're not functional to a place where you are functional. Second point, the I stands for intense exercise. What we're trying to do besides releasing endorphins is hit that anaerobic phase of breathing. So any exercise nuts in here, they could tell you the anaerobic phase is where our bodies are working hard, we're breathing hard, but we still have enough oxygen to do it. The anaerobic phase is where we're working out so intensely that our bodies go into just a small oxygen debt. So if you've ever finished an exercise and you're almost a little bit giddy, that's the anaerobic phase of exercise, right? And so that's often kind of helpful to when we're feeling times of high stress or anxiety. Not only are we releasing endorphins, but we're trying to get into that oxygen debt, because the flip side of it is our body overcorrects. So when we are giddy, when we're laughing, it's our body desperately trying to stabilize itself, and usually we overcorrect. So it's kind of a cheap way to get a little more oxygen in your system as well. The last two usually go together: paced breathing, progressive muscle relaxation. For the paced breathing, I usually suggest that folks pick two numbers, smaller number on your inhale, and you try and make it an odd and an even number as well. I find that it's easier to remain focused on your numbers and your counts and not let your mind wander if you're picking two numbers that don't generally go together, like 4 and 7, right? And then the way that we use that with progressive muscle relaxation is that we start at one end of our bodies. I usually start with feet or calves. And on our inhale for the paced breathing, we tense up that muscle group. So you would, for example, count to 4 on your inhale, flex your calves and your shins and your feet. And then as we're exhaling on the 7, you just release that muscle group completely. And you do this 3 or 4 times, and it can help with stress or anxiety. I usually like to finish with forearms and fists. It feels really good to release that tension on your fists the last time you do this. Wrapping up here, I'm going to give yet another plug to the support group. We run it on Wednesday evenings. It is free for all licensed attorneys. We run in 8-week cycles. I know there's a couple folks who have joined in this room today, so I'm so grateful for your participation. And so you are the ones that have heard me say that we run in 8-week cycles because I like to model healthy behavior. When we got this group going, we ran this every single week, starting in about March of 2021. And then to protect my own health, we had to kind of pare that down. So it is possible to set that boundary, at least in the mental health profession. But I would welcome everyone to join. This is not a group that builds on itself. If you miss a week, you are welcome to come back the next week. The topics are unique every single week. We do have some regulars, but everyone is welcome. And I feel like our regulars do a great job in making sure new folks do not feel ostracized or otherwise feel awkward into a fully functioning group already. And then finally, just a quick rundown of the other services that the Lawyers and Judges Assistance Program offers, should you ever need them. We offer consultation. Often it's very hard to have that conversation if you're concerned about a loved one or a colleague or a family member, whether they're in the legal profession or not. Very hard to have that conversation. And while we cannot contact this person for you, what we'll do is walk you through the conversation to have with them and also how to encourage them to call us. Once they've called us once, we can get our hooks in and we can go from there. We do offer low-cost counseling for law students. Generally, this is short-term, but it's usually utilized by students right around the end of the semester. Not really sure if that correlates with anything particularly yet, still trying to figure that out. But it's usually 6 to 12 sessions. We charge $5 a session. We'll go down further than that to make sure that money is no issue for the law students. We cannot afford to offer it to all 40,000 plus licensed attorneys in Michigan. We have 3 therapists on staff. It just would not be feasible. What we can do, though, is refer you to an outside therapist that we have vetted. Usually this is a person who has seen lawyers in the past. They understand the unique stressors of what it's like to practice law. You will not have to teach them about the uniqueness of the legal profession to be able to feel like they really hear you. And that's because if I refer you to a therapist, you will not be their first lawyer. Usually if folks call me for a referral, I will give you 2 to 3 names that day of folks who take your insurance and have worked with lawyers in the past. And then, as I mentioned earlier, part of my job is unfortunately monitoring. These are folks that have usually had some kind of ethical issue come up. And all we're doing is making sure that they stay on the tracks because the number one goal of any state bar is to protect the public first. So while I do care about all of you and want to see you thrive as far as well-being, I care about your clients even more than that. And that's what we do in monitoring, is making sure that some of these folks who it's gone off the rails for are now safe to practice moving forward. We also offer in-house assessment. Most of the time that is tied to monitoring as well. Sometimes folks just want to leg up. We're a lot cheaper than the private sector. And so if you're looking to get an assessment with a private sector therapist, give us a call first. We'll probably do it for much less. Usually it's about 3 hours and we get it back to you in about 2 to 3 weeks. I will leave us on the contact information page. Feel free to call or email at us. We'd be happy to respond. We also have a helpline number that naturally I didn't list here. But if there are any questions, I think I rushed through this a little bit, so hopefully we've got time for them.
Yeah, so what I'll ask is if you do have any questions, just drop them in the chat because I want to run through our prepared questions first, and we do have a little bit of time, so hopefully we can get to everything. So if you have any specific questions, please leave them in the chat, and then I'll circle back in just a minute. So
I see one question in the chat asking how to join.
yeah, we can go ahead and address that.
I'm going to drop the email address in right now. It is contactljap@mishbar.org. Just shoot us an email expressing your interest. And this is kind of how we play gatekeeper and ensure some level of privacy and confidentiality. So we're not going to ask you to fill out any paperwork, but we are going to confirm that you have a P number and you are a Michigan lawyer. And it's just our step of security. So there's no formal link you can click. You just have to email the contact LJAP and then we'll email you a link to the Zoom.
Actually, before I turn to our prepared questions, there was a question in the chat that I do want to hit on because I think it applies for all of us. And the question is, what can we do to help? What can you suggest that we do to help other attorneys, for example, our groups or committees or that sort of thing that we could join that might help?
Essentially, which organizations would you suggest?
Yeah, or if there's best practices, things that we can be doing as individual attorneys to best help in the well-being of the profession as a whole or individual attorneys, if there's just some best practices.
Sure. A couple things come to mind immediately. And I mean, I think there was a plug for joining the Lawyers and Judges Assistance Committee earlier. You all do fantastic work. So if you are interested, by all means. The biggest thing would be not perpetuating some of these culture issues that have led you to this point to start with. If you do have some authority, if you are a legal stakeholder, it's more on you to break this cycle than anyone else. I can sit here on Zoom or speak in person and implore you to do it. But it's often not an easy change to make as well. So kind of identifying the places in your organization that might be holding on to some unhealthy pieces of older legal culture is a good step. And the other thing too, especially for the folks who are legal stakeholders, is modeling the healthy behavior. Use your vacation time. Encourage the people that are with you to use their vacation time. Show them that it is okay. Don't pay lip service to the vacation time. Actually take yours. I think actually taking yours is probably a more powerful statement than just verbally encouraging other people to use theirs.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And I would also just thank everybody too, just to jump in, that's here today, because it's also modeling behavior being in this conversation to start with. So I want to just turn to our prepared questions just so we can hit on them briefly. The first one thing that comes up very often with most, if not all, attorneys is dealing with what I call difficult people or difficult individuals. This could be clients, this could be that opposing counsel that's just nasty to you. It could even be colleagues that you having a difficult time with. How can attorneys protect their mental health and ensure that resilience when dealing with these difficult personalities?
I appreciate that question. Thank you. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind, and this is another one of those easier said than done pieces, is that usually their bad behavior is not about you. I'm willing to admit that in some small cases, people absolutely carry personal vendettas and grudges and whatnot. But for a lot of times, for some of the nastier people in our lives, usually there's something deeper going on under the surface with them as well. And so keeping in mind that statistically, they're probably not targeting you personally. I don't want to say anyone was born a jerk, but they could have been, they very likely have been a jerk for a long time, and you just happen to be the most recent person in their lives. So I would say do your best to keep that in mind. Do your best not to take it personally. I would say if it rises to a safety or civility issue, then you need to utilize everything that's available to you as far as the Attorney Grievance Commission, because when people are in civil, I think it reflects poorly on the legal profession. And I say that as kind of a legal layperson, right? When I hear about lawyers acting rudely to each other, I'm an outsider thinking, wow, I don't know, it's not a great look for the entire profession. So, yeah, ultimately it's, do what you can. Try and remember that it's usually not about you.
Thank you. And I also wanted to allow Michael Lieb to chime in as well, as he sits on the Professionalism and Civility Committee for the State Bar of Michigan.
Mary, thanks. And thank you to Tom. I'm proud of the bar, the state bar, and also the ABA for working hard over the last few years to bring attention to wellness. From our committee's perspective, wellness is an important part of professionalism and civility. What Tom has been talking about, I think, particularly in the topic of building resilience, is awareness. And we're talking about, I think, awareness of our own behavior, and obviously that's critical, but we can be aware of our adversaries' behavior as well. I think when we know somebody and we know they're acting in a way that's inconsistent with how you've known them over the years, perhaps, then there are things you might be able to do, even with a conversation with that person. But there are also tools that the courts have from time to time. And it goes beyond just filing a grievance. Even the AGC from time to time will refer matters to LJAP. Tom, I think you need to correct me on that if I'm wrong, but there is a recognition amongst AGC and the bench, a growing number of judges on the bench. They have more options than just referring somebody to AGC. We can ask the court, to refer somebody to LJAP, for example. If that were part of, obviously you do that in a sensitive way, but there are ways to deal with this behavior that are more, I think, humane than just filing motions for sanctions, for example. So I really appreciate Tom. I appreciate everybody at LJAP. I've worked with Molly. Unfortunately, I was going to work with Tom, and then we got the schedule change. But great group of people and important. Thanks, Mary.
No, thank you for chiming in. And we appreciate it. I want to hit a couple more questions. We have a few more minutes here. Kind of going along the difficult person theme. Tom, how would you suggest, are there, or how would you suggest that we go about setting healthy boundaries when it comes to those the clients and colleagues that tend to test those boundaries?
Yeah, that's gonna look different for every person, obviously, but a couple things that are usually common are that, you know, when we're making up our mind on whether we're going to set this boundary with folks, the biggest place that usually that I see people lose steam is that they are afraid of what the response is going to be. You know, you build it in your head, you think, you daydream or think about, you know, what that conversation is going to look like. And then you start to lose a little bit of your nerve thinking, okay, what's their reaction? I'm going to have to deal with this difficult reaction. Is it really worth it to deal with the difficult reaction? Or can I just let whatever the problem behavior is keep going? It's not really that bothersome to me. So the biggest piece of advice I would offer for setting a healthy boundary is to steel yourself for the inevitable unhealthy reaction or rude reaction or whatever it is you're fearing. You are probably correct, but it's keeping in mind, and it's kind of a decisional balance, but keeping in mind the long term, you know, you need to set this boundary, even if the immediate benefit is smaller than the immediate negative of having to deal with their reaction to you. In the long term, you know, you're thinking about setting this boundary for a reason, follow through on it. But just prepare for what it is, understand that it is coming. You know, it's acknowledge it to yourself that it is coming. But I would say don't let that be the piece where it ruins your nerve for setting the healthy boundary.
Thank you, thank you. And we got a question in the chat that's kind of related to this, so I just wanted to hit on that. The question was, is there anything being done? And maybe this is sort of a, not to put Michael on the spot too, but if maybe this is sort of a civility question too, but is there anything being done to increase awareness among the bench? The questioner mentions that there's been some instances where maybe adjournments have been denied and that sort of thing, and it puts them in a bind when it comes to their life. I think it's one thing when we talk about a difficult client or difficult colleague, but obviously there have been instances among the bench as well that are being pointed out in that question.
Yeah, and I think it has been slower for the judiciary. A couple developments I can share. Very recently, the Michigan Judicial Tenure Commission was granted the ability to make referrals to Lawyers and Judges Assistance Program. Up until that point, a lot of it was kept in-house is probably the best way I can put that. So we are starting to see some judges seek help or be referred to us for seeking help. I'm also happy to share that our director, Molly Rands, is at the Michigan Judicial Conference as we speak right now, passing out little stress gavels to 500 plus judges. And I will be there tomorrow. I don't think I'm allowed to share where it is until it's over for security reasons, but I will be there tomorrow passing out gavels, shaking babies and kissing hands and doing all that. So we are present in these judicial spaces, but obviously they are definitely behind the legal profession as a whole when it comes to addressing well-being.
Another question that we got is a practical one. We've talked about the Lawyers and Judges Assistance Committee at the state bar level, but are there other ways that we can volunteer to help? Are there specific committees we can join in order to help spread awareness?
You know, I think it's helpful whenever we get to speak to smaller or affinity bars as well, right? So not necessarily organizations that are geared towards wellness as their main focus, but bringing that piece of wellness into the organizations you're already in. And I'll extend that further as a plug. You know, if you're in a big law firm, have us out, come and invite somebody out to speak about wellness. You know, a lot of times it's good. You know, I would rather a big firm pay lip service to wellness than ignore it completely. So I'll take the foot in the door there. But, you know, if you're a member of a county bar or an affinity bar or anything else, you know, raise that topic of wellness, kind of integrate it into part of the mission and go from there.
Yeah, and I will say on my behalf, I've seen quite a number of bar associations developing well-being or mental health committees or groups. I know we have at the Oakland County Bar Association, and I've seen at other affinity or local bar associations as well. And I always encourage, as chair of the OCBA's committee, come to our meetings, be part of the conversation, and I think that's such a great way to help destigmatize the issue. Well, I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So I'm going to go to one that we had prepared. You talked briefly about this concept of compassion fatigue, where we kind of at a certain point get numbed out. We can't even give anymore. Are there some tips that you would recommend to kind of minimize the risk of that when working with clients who come to us with different traumatic incidents and stories?
Yeah, I think there's a big push right now for trauma-informed lawyering, and that's an entirely different topic, but I respect the heck out of folks who are pushing it. So it's helpful first in how you interact with them, not to re-traumatize them. But obviously, you know, they are secondhand or third hand traumatizing you on a smaller scale every single time here. And like I mentioned earlier, that's usually unavoidable. The biggest thing to make sure that that is not then turning into compassion fatigue over time is just protecting your own health and wellness. It looks like different things for different folks depending on your area of practice. Sometimes it can be as simple as setting a healthy boundary with clients, especially if you work in an area where clients are prone to be texting you at all hours. I've heard of folks writing it into their agreement. This is what I charge per text message. This is what I charge after these hours. Doing things like that to protect yourself. And, you know, again, engaging in those activities that are going to help build your own resilience. You're essentially coping ahead of time. Every time you make a deposit into that resilience bank, it's insulating you against having compassion fatigue somewhere down the line.
Thank you. A topic that you had mentioned in the statistics from the 2016 study, I wanted to talk about new lawyers. We've talked about how demanding the legal field can be, and newer attorneys generally are not in the practice of saying no to work or assignments. We're told pretty early on, you know, that's kind of taboo. But how would you recommend that newer attorneys do balance those demands of their careers and protect their well-being in a culture where we are not accustomed to saying no?
Yeah, that is a very, very precarious tightrope to be walking. One thing I will share, and you know, more for the attorneys that haven't gotten themselves the position yet, where they're going to be demanded, you know, to be working essentially 24/7, is that the pandemic changed things for young lawyers. What we're seeing in the last 2 to 3 years, actually for 3 years in a row now, is that associate lateral movement is outranking the hires of new associates. So we're seeing that there is a lot of power being shifted back to the younger lawyers. You have more leverage than you think on the interview. I know sometimes it can feel like a dizzying experience to interview with a large firm where you know you're going to be expected to work a ton of hours. But just understanding that you have more leverage than you think you do. Young lawyers now have a lot more power than they used to too. And making the decision and being very, I guess, aware of exactly how much you're willing to sacrifice on that work-life balance. how many extra hours are you willing to put in, and making it very clear early on with whoever your legal supervisor might be as well. It's just setting that expectation, setting the healthy boundary, but also being prepared to accept consequences for that.
Thank you. Another thing we talked about briefly, but I wanted to make sure we touch on in even more detail is the happy hour gatherings that are pretty common in our profession. And our question is, as we move further away from what used to be strictly happy hour gatherings, what are some social activities that you are seeing or that you recommend as networking opportunities that don't involve alcohol use or drinking in those activities?
Well, I appreciate one final chance to plug the support group.
Mhm.
This is a group of lawyers who have come and essentially are looking to support each other. I warn folks on week 1 of the 8-week cycle every single time that I am far more comfortable sitting in awkward silences than any of you are, because it was part of my education. So I'm not going to be doing the heavy lifting in the support group. You all have to actually interact with each other. So, I mean, virtual support group, great way to network. Join your local county bar, join your affinity bar. I would say get out and participate in the events. And, unfortunately, a lot of those events are going to be drinking focused as well. But I would say if you're in a leadership position, maybe question why that is. It doesn't have to be an automatic piece of these networking functions, right? I think sometimes it's kind of taken for granted that there's going to be a table with beer and wine at it in the back corner, but I would say really examine who is going to miss that if it happened to not be there for your outing.
Thank you. Thank you. I will say, at the OCBA too, one thing we did that I would suggest, for different groups too is focus on, especially when the weather's nice, some outdoor activities. Like we had scheduled, last year we did a walk, at a local park, and that was, to honor the physical aspect of well-being. So just kind of a plug, the suggestion on my end too is maybe think about taking it outdoors, doing something with nature. And as Allison chimed in, make sure there's I agree with this too. Make sure there's non-alcoholic options available at different events too, to make
Yeah, I
everybody.
think there's a certain level sometimes of embarrassment to be the only person not drinking in the room, and that says a lot, really. If we're feeling guilt or shame for having a cup full of water or pop,